Brian Kennedy's eyes snap open, his body shuddering violently as he regains consciousness. Blue-skinned alien females press their bodies against his, their touch both foreign and intimate. This is not how he expected his solo mission to the ice planet Fridia to end. Mere hours ago, the 32-year-old human explorer had been piloting his ship through the Andromeda Galaxy's outer reaches. Now he lies in the medical bay of an alien vessel, surrounded by strange beings using their own body heat to save his life. The crash replays in his mind, alarms blaring as Fridia's brutal climate overwhelmed his ship's systems, ice crystals forming on the cockpit windows, the sickening crunch of metal as he impacted the frozen surface, his desperate attempts to repair the craft, fingers numbing as hypothermia set in, then darkness. An alien face hovers above him, bioluminescent markings pulsing with an otherworldly glow. "The human is awake," she announces, her voice tinged with curiosity and concern. Brian tries to speak, but his throat constricts, raw from the frigid air he'd breathed before losing consciousness. He manages a weak cough, drawing the alien's attention. The one who spoke, clearly the leader, leans closer. "I am Zara," she says, her words carefully enunciated. "We found you near death. Your biology is unlike ours. This was the only way to save you." Brian's mind races, processing the situation. He's making first contact with an advanced alien race, and they've broken their own rules to rescue him. The implications are staggering. Zara continues, "We are Andromedans. Our bodies generate heat, allowing us to survive Fridia's harsh climate. We use this ability to raise your core temperature." As if on cue, the other aliens shift against him, their warmth seeping into his bones. Brian feels a mix of gratitude and awkwardness at the intimate contact. "Thank you," he croaks, finally finding his voice. "I'm Brian Kennedy, from Earth." Zara's eyes widen. "Earth? We've heard whispers of your world. This encounter, it changes everything." Before Brian can respond, alarms blare throughout the ship. An Andromedan rushes into the medical bay, panic evident in her glowing markings. "Captain Zara, we've detected an approaching vessel. It matches no known configurations in our database." Zara straightens, her demeanor shifting from curious scientist to commanding officer. "It must be his people," she says, gesturing to Brian. "They're searching for him." Brian's heart races. Earth's Interstellar Exploration Agency must have dispatched a rescue team, but they don't know about the Andromedans. If they misinterpret the situation... "We need to make contact," Brian says urgently, attempting to sit up. The aliens supporting him adjust their positions, helping him rise. "If they think you've captured me, it could lead to conflict." Zara nods, her expression grave. "Agreed. This encounter must be handled delicately. The future of both our species may depend on it." As the Andromedan ship prepares to make contact with the approaching humans, Brian realizes he's at the center of a potentially universe-altering event. His solo mission has become something far greater, a bridge between two civilizations. The medical bay hums with tension. Brian, still entwined with his alien saviors, watches as Zara moves to the communication panel. In this moment, balance between worlds, the fate of interstellar relations hangs in the balance. And it all started with a crash landing on a frozen planet, where alien beauties offered their body heat to save a human life. The alarms continue to blare as Zara swiftly moves to the communication panel. Brian, still supported by the other Andromedans, feels his heart racing with anticipation. The fate of two civilizations rests on what happens next. Zara's fingers dance across the holographic interface, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with heightened intensity. "Incoming transmission," she announces, her voice tight with tension. A crackling voice fills the medical bay. "This is Commander Jack Harper of the Earth Rescue Fleet. We've detected an unknown vessel in the vicinity of our missing explorer's last known location. Identify yourselves immediately." Brian tries to sit up straighter, wincing as his body protests the movement. The blue-skinned aliens adjust their positions, offering silent support. He locks eyes with Zara, nodding slightly. Zara takes a deep breath before responding. "This is Captain Zara of the Andromedan research vessel, Stellaris. We have your explorer aboard. He is safe and recovering from injuries sustained during a crash landing." There's a pause, then Commander Harper's voice returns, infused with suspicion. We demand visual confirmation of his status and immediate transfer to our vessel. Brian clears his throat, finding his voice stronger now. This is Brian Kennedy. I can confirm Captain Zara's statement. The Andromedans rescued me from certain death. They've treated me with nothing but kindness. As Brian speaks, he becomes acutely aware of the warmth emanating from the aliens surrounding him. Their touch, once strange, now feels oddly comforting. He catches the eye of one of the females, her name tag identifying her as Lyra, and notices a flicker of something in her gaze. Concern, uncertainty. Commander Harper's tone softens slightly. Brian, it's good to hear your voice. Are you able to return to our ship? Before Brian can respond, Zara interjects. I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment. Brian's condition requires continued monitoring. Our medical facilities are best equipped to handle his unique case. Brian nods in agreement, though a part of him wonders if there's more to Zara's reluctance than just medical concerns. He's seen the way she looks at him, a mix of scientific curiosity and something deeper, more personal. Very well, Commander Harper replies after a moment's hesitation. We'll maintain orbit and request regular updates on his condition. I expect full cooperation and transparency from your people, Captain Zara. As the communication ends, the tension in the medical base shifts. The immediate crisis may have passed, but Brian senses that a new, more complex situation is unfolding. Zara turns to him, her luminescent markings pulsing softly. I apologize for speaking on your behalf, Brian. Your health truly is our primary concern, but there are other factors at play. Brian raises an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. What kind of factors? Zara glances at the other Andromedans, who nod almost imperceptibly. Our High Council has ordered us to keep your presence here confidential while they debate the implications of first contact. Your rescue has put us in a delicate position. As if on cue, a holographic display materializes in the center of the room. It shows a group of elderly Andromedans engaged in heated discussion, their markings flashing in agitation. They fear the consequences of open contact with humans, Zara explains, her voice tinged with frustration. Our society values stability and isolation. Your arrival threatens to upend centuries of tradition. Brian processes this information, his mind racing. He's not just a castaway anymore. He's become an unwitting ambassador for his entire species. The weight of responsibility settles on his shoulders, mixing with the lingering effects of his ordeal. I understand, he says finally, but I can't hide forever. My people will want answers, and yours deserve to know the truth. Zara nods, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I agree. Perhaps together we can find a way to bridge our two worlds. As she speaks, Zara moves closer to Brian. Her hand brushes against his arm, sending an unexpected jolt through his body. Their eyes meet, and for a moment, the complexities of their situation fade away. There's a connection here, something neither of them fully understands but both can feel. The moment is broken by a sharp intake of breath from Lyra. Brian turns to see her watching them, her markings pulsing with what he now recognizes as agitation. She quickly averts her gaze, but not before Brian catches a glimpse of conflict in her eyes. We should begin a full medical evaluation, Lyra says, her voice carefully neutral, to ensure there are no lingering effects from your exposure to Fridia's atmosphere. As the Andromedans prepare various scanning devices, Brian can't help but feel that he's stepping into uncharted territory. The medical bay hums with activity, but beneath the surface he senses currents of tension and possibility. Zara's touch lingers for a moment longer before she steps back, resuming her role as captain and lead scientist. Let's start with a full-body scan, she announces, her professional demeanor firmly in place. But as she turns to calibrate the equipment, Brian catches a fleeting glance that speaks volumes. This is only the beginning, he realizes. Whatever happens next will shape the future of both their species. As the scanner hums to life, bathing him in a soft blue light, Brian Kennedy prepares himself for a journey into the unknown, one that promises to be far more complex and profound than any solo mission he could have imagined. The medical evaluation proceeded smoothly, with the Andromedan technology providing insights into Brian's physiology that even Earth's most advanced scanners couldn't match. As the days passed, Brian's strength returned, and his curiosity about his alien saviors grew. Zara, intrigued by their unexpected guest, began spending more time with Brian outside of the necessary medical checks. She offered to give him a tour of the Stellaris, eager to share the marvels of Andromedan technology with the human explorer. As they walked through the ship's gleaming corridors, Brian marveled at the organic design, so different from the utilitarian Earth vessels he was accustomed to. Zara's bioluminescent markings pulsed with excitement as she explained the ship's various systems, her hand occasionally brushing against Brian's arm as she pointed out particularly interesting features. Their tour led them to the ship's hydroponics bay, a vast chamber filled with an array of alien flora. Brian's eyes widened as he took in the sight of plants unlike anything he'd ever seen on Earth. Vibrant blue leaves stretched towards artificial light sources while vines with iridescent tendrils coiled around nutrient-rich pillars. "This is incredible," Brian breathed, his voice filled with awe. "How do you manage to grow such diverse plant life in these conditions?" Zara smiled, her markings glowing with pride. "These plants are the lifeblood of our colonies on Fridia," she explained. "They've been genetically engineered to thrive in extreme environments, providing us with both sustenance and oxygen." As they moved deeper into the hydroponics bay, Brian's attention was drawn to a cluster of flowers with petals that seemed to shimmer and shift colors. He leaned in for a closer look, inadvertently brushing against a thorny stem. A sharp pain lanced through his hand and he let out a surprised hiss. "Brian!" Zara exclaimed, concern evident in her voice. Without hesitation, she grabbed his hand to inspect the wound. The moment their skin made contact, an intense tingling sensation coursed through both of them. Brian's eyes locked with Zara's, both of them frozen in shock at the unexpected and pleasurable feeling. What was that?" Brian asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He found himself reluctant to pull his hand away from Zara's touch. Zara's markings pulsed rapidly, betraying her own surprise and excitement. "I'm not sure," she replied, her fingers still intertwined with Brian's. "Our physiologies must be interacting in some unforeseen way." The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. They quickly separated as Lyra entered the hydroponics bay, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene before her. "Captain," Lyra said, her tone clipped, "the High Council is requesting an update on our guest condition." Zara straightened, adopting a more professional demeanor. "Of course, I'll prepare a report immediately." She turned to Brian, her expression softening slightly. "We should have that cut looked at. Please follow me to the medical bay." As they left the hydroponics bay, Brian could feel Lyra's suspicious gaze boring into his back. He realized that his presence on the ship was causing more tension among the crew than he had initially thought. In the medical bay, Naya, the ship's medical officer, tended to Brian's minor injury. As she worked, her eyes darted between Brian and Zara, clearly noting the charged atmosphere between them. "Captain," Naya said, her voice tinged with scientific curiosity, "I couldn't help but overhear about the reaction you experienced. With your permission, I'd like to conduct some controlled experiments to study this phenomenon. It could lead to significant breakthroughs in our understanding of interspecies biology." Zara hesitated for a moment, her gaze meeting Brian's. He gave a small nod, his own curiosity piqued by the strange connection they had experienced. "Very well," Zara agreed. "We'll participate in your study, Naya. But let's keep this between us for now. I don't want to cause unnecessary alarm among the crew or the High Council until we understand more about what's happening." As Naya began setting up equipment for the first round of tests, Brian couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. He was about to embark on a journey of scientific discovery that could change the course of human-Andromedan relations forever. The experiments began with simple touch tests, monitoring the physiological responses of both Brian and Zara. With each contact, the tingling sensation returned, accompanied by a rush of endorphins that left them both feeling energized and oddly connected. As the days passed, the experiments grew more complex. Naya discovered that prolonged physical contact between Brian and Zara not only produced pleasurable sensations, but also seemed to have healing properties for both species. Cuts and bruises on Brian's skin faded faster when in contact with Zara, while her bioluminescent markings glowed brighter and more vibrantly after their sessions. The implications of these findings were not lost on anyone involved. Zara found herself torn between her growing feelings for Brian and her duty as captain. She knew that this discovery could have far-reaching consequences for both their species, but she couldn't deny the personal connection she felt with the human explorer. Brian, for his part, was equally conflicted. The more time he spent with Zara and the other Andromedans, the more he came to appreciate their advanced civilization. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of homesickness that crept in during quiet moments. Earth seemed impossibly far away, and he wondered how his family and colleagues were coping with his disappearance. One evening, as they sat together in the observation deck, watching the stars of the Andromeda galaxy swirl past, Brian turned to Zara with a serious expression. "Zara," he said softly, "I need to contact Earth. My people need to know I'm safe. I understand your concerns about revealing your existence, but we can't keep this secret forever." Zara's markings pulsed with anxiety, but she nodded slowly. "You're right, Brian. We've been putting off this decision for too long. Perhaps we can find a way to send a coded message that won't disclose our location or identity." As they worked together to craft the message, their bodies drew closer, the familiar tingling sensation building between them. Brian could feel the warmth of Zara's skin, smell the faint, alien scent that he had come to associate with her. Their eyes met, and for a moment it seemed as if they might finally give in to the desire that had been building between them. Suddenly, an urgent alert blared through the ship's communication system, shattering the intimate moment. Zara's markings flashed with alarm as she quickly accessed the nearest console. "Unknown vessel approaching," she announced, her voice tense. It's of human design." Brian's heart raced as he realized the implications. The rescue team from Earth had finally caught up with them. As alarms sounded throughout the Stellaris and the Andromedan crew scrambled to respond to this new development, Brian knew that the next few moments would determine the future of human-Andromedan relations. The once quiet observation deck erupted into a flurry of activity as Andromedan crew members rushed in, their bioluminescent markings pulsing with a mixture of fear and excitement. Zara quickly assumed her role as captain, issuing orders in rapid succession. "Engage stealth systems. Prepare for evasive maneuvers if necessary," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. She turned to Brian, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and drive. "We need to decide quickly how to handle this situation." Brian nodded, his mind racing. He knew that the next few moments could shape the course of interstellar relations for generations to come. "Let me speak to them," he suggested. "I can act as an intermediary, explain the situation. We might be able to prevent a conflict before it starts." Zara hesitated, weighing the risks. Before she could respond, Lyra burst into the observation deck, her markings flashing with agitation. "Captain, we can't allow this," Lyra exclaimed. "Exposing ourselves to the humans goes against everything our society stands for. We must maintain our policy of non-interference at all costs." The tension in the room escalated as crew members took sides, some agreeing with Lyra's cautious approach, others supporting Brian's plea for open communication. Zara raised her hand, silencing the debate. "We don't have time for division," she said firmly. "The human ship is closing in, and we need to make a decision now." As if to emphasize her point, the ship's sensors blared another warning. The human vessel was now close enough to attempt communication. The crew fell silent as a familiar voice filled the observation deck. "Unidentified vessel, this is Commander Jack Harper of the Earth Rescue Fleet. We have reason to believe you are holding one of our people. Prepare to be boarded, or we will be forced to take hostile action." The ultimatum hung in the air, the threat of conflict now all too real. Brian stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Let me talk to them, Zara," he pleaded. "It's our best chance to avoid a catastrophe." Zara met his gaze, seeing the tenacity in his eyes. She knew that whatever decision she made now would have far-reaching consequences for both their species. The fate of human-Andromedan relations hung in the balance, with the potential for either peaceful cooperation or interstellar conflict just moments away. Away. The tension in the observation deck was palpable as Brian stepped forward, his heart racing. Zara, please, he urged, his voice low and intense. Let me talk to them. I can prevent this from escalating. Zara's markings pulsed with uncertainty, but she nodded, her trust in Brian overriding her caution. Very well, but be careful with what you say. Brian took a deep breath and approached the communication console. With a nod from Zara, he opened a channel to the human vessel. Commander Harper, this is Brian Kennedy. I'm safe and unharmed. The situation is complex. I request a peaceful meeting to explain everything. There was a tense pause before Commander Harper's voice crackled through the speakers again. Kennedy, is that really you? How can we trust this isn't a trick? Brian thought quickly, recalling a shared memory. Jack, remember that night in Houston when we snuck onto the launch pad? You said the stars looked close enough to touch. A chuckle came through the comm. All right, it's you. But I need more than that. What are we dealing with here? I've made first contact with an advanced alien species, Brian explained, feeling the weight of his words. They saved my life, Jack. They're peaceful but cautious. I'm proposing a face-to-face meeting on the surface of Fridia. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Finally, Commander Harper responded, Agreed, but we're coming armed and ready for anything. Send coordinates for the meeting site. As the communication ended, Brian turned to see the Andromedan crew staring at him with a mix of awe and apprehension. Zara stepped forward, her markings glowing with a determined blue light. We need to prepare, she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Naya, outfit Brian with protective gear adapted for Frigidia's surface. Lyra, inform the High Council of our decision. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Brian found himself being fitted with a sleek, silvery suit that seemed to mold itself to his body. Naya explained that it would protect him from the extreme cold while allowing him to move freely. As they prepared to board the shuttle, Zara pulled Brian aside. Are you sure about this? She asked, her markings pulsing with concern. Brian nodded, reaching out to touch her arm. The familiar tingling sensation flowed between them, bringing a measure of comfort. It's our best chance for peaceful contact. Trust me. They boarded the shuttle, the close quarters amplifying the tension between them. As they descended through Frigidia's icy atmosphere, Brian couldn't help but marvel at the alien world coming into view. Vast plains of blue-white ice stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by jagged mountain ranges that seemed to glow with an inner light. The shuttle touched down on a flat expanse of ice, sending up a spray of crystalline particles. In the distance, Brian could see a human vehicle approaching, its treads leaving deep tracks in the frozen surface. Zara activated the shuttle's airlock, and a blast of frigid air rushed in. Despite the protective suit, Brian felt the cold seep into his bones. He took Zara's hand, drawing strength from her warmth, before stepping out onto the icy surface of Frigidia. Commander Harper and Lieutenant Cook emerged from their vehicle, their bulky Earth-made suits a stark contrast to the sleek Andromedan design. Both parties approached each other slowly, weapons visible but lowered. Brian, Jack called out, his voice tight with emotion. It's good to see you alive. Jack, Brian replied, smiling despite the tension. I'm glad you're here. There's so much to explain. As Brian began to recount his experiences, a low rumble filled the air. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and Brian saw Jack's eyes widen in alarm. Geomagnetic storm, Zara shouted, her markings flashing urgent patterns. We need to take shelter immediately. The sky above them swirled with eerie, otherworldly colors as the storm intensified. Jack's suit crackled with static, and his vehicle's lights flickered ominously. Our systems are failing, Lieutenant Cook reported, panic edging into his voice. We can't make it back to the ship in this. Without hesitation, Brian gestured towards the Andromedan shuttle. Quick, get inside. It's our only chance. As the humans scrambled into the alien vessel, Brian caught Zara's eye. The look they shared spoke volumes. This unexpected turn of events could change everything. The airlock sealed behind them, shutting out the howling wind and leaving them in a tense silence. Humans and Andromedans forced together by circumstance, the fate of their species' future hanging in the balance. Balance as the geomagnetic storm raged outside. Inside the Andromedan shuttle, the atmosphere was tense. Commander Harper and Lieutenant Cook huddled together, their bulky suits making the already cramped space feel even smaller. Zara and Brian exchanged glances, both acutely aware of the delicate situation they now faced. As the storm's intensity grew, Zara activated the shuttle's advanced shielding systems. The interior lights flickered momentarily before stabilizing, casting an eerie glow over the occupants. "Your technology is impressive," Commander Harper admitted, his voice tinged with a mixture of awe and wariness. Brian seized the opportunity to bridge the gap. "Jack, there's so much we can learn from each other. The Andromedans have been nothing but peaceful and helpful since they rescued me." Before Jack could respond, the shuttle's communications system crackled to life. Naya's voice came through, permeated with urgency. "Captain, the storm is intensifying. It's unsafe to attempt a return to either vessel. We need to seek more permanent shelter." Zara's markings pulsed with grit as she made a quick decision. "Understood. We'll head to the construction site of the joint base. It's our best option for weathering this storm." The next few hours were a blur of activity as the shuttle navigated through the treacherous storm towards the fledgling base. Upon arrival, they found a handful of human and Andromedan workers already there, having sought refuge from the worsening conditions. As days turned into weeks, the storm showed no signs of abating. The small group of humans and Andromedans found themselves working side by side to complete the base's essential systems, their survival depending on cooperation. Initially, the collaboration was smooth, with both species marveling at each other's unique abilities and knowledge. Brian and Zara worked tirelessly to facilitate communication and understanding between the two groups. However, as time wore on, cracks began to appear in their tenuous alliance. Lieutenant Cook in particular grew increasingly agitated by the Andromedans' superior adaptation to the harsh environment and their advanced technology. One day, as Brian was helping to install a complex filtration system designed by the Andromedans, he overheard Cook muttering to a group of human workers, "Look at them, showing off with their fancy tech. How long before they decide they don't need us anymore?" Brian approached, hoping to ease the tension. "Cook, we're all in this together. Their knowledge complements ours. We're stronger as a team." Cook's eyes narrowed. "Easy for you to say, Kennedy. You've gone native." Before Brian could respond, a loud crash echoed through the base. They rushed to the source of the noise to find a piece of Andromedan equipment smashed on the ground, a human worker standing nearby with a guilty expression. "It was an accident," the worker stammered, but the look exchanged between him and Cook told a different story. As incidents like these became more frequent, Zara found herself pulled in multiple directions. She confided in Brian one evening, her markings dim with worry. "The High Council is growing concerned about these accidents. Councillor Vex, in particular, is pushing for the termination of the joint project." Brian frowned, running a hand through his hair. "We can't let that happen. There's too much at stake." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Alara, the Andromedan geneticist who had been working tirelessly in the base's research division. Her markings were pulsing with excitement as she burst into the room. "Captain Brian, I've made a breakthrough," she exclaimed. "Our preliminary studies show that controlled exposure to human DNA can enhance our healing abilities significantly." The implications of this discovery hung heavy in the air. Brian's mind raced with the potential benefits and risks of such knowledge. "This could change everything," he said softly, meeting Zara's gaze. "But it also raises a lot of ethical questions." Zara nodded, her expression grave. "The Council will have concerns about using human genetic material, and I fear how some humans might react to this news." As they discussed the ramifications of Dr. Alara's findings, Brian came to a decision. "I'll volunteer for the research," he said firmly. "If I can show that humans are willing to contribute, it might help ease tensions." Zara's markings flashed with concern. "Brian, are you sure? We don't know the long-term effects this could have on you." He reached out, taking her hand and feeling the familiar tingle of connection. "I'm sure. This is bigger than just me. It's about the future of our species. Both of them. As news of Brian's decision spread throughout the base, reactions were mixed. Commander Harper, after initial skepticism, began to see the potential for genuine cooperation. However, Lieutenant Cook and his followers viewed it as a betrayal. Unbeknownst to the inhabitants of the base, Counselor Vex had received word of the genetic research. Alarmed by the implications, he set in motion a plan that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone on Fridia. As a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the base's structure, Brian and Zara stood side by side, looking out at the storm-ravaged landscape. The challenges ahead loomed large, but in that moment, they drew strength from each other's presence, ready to face whatever came next. The geomagnetic storm continued to rage outside, its fury unabated. Inside the base, tensions simmered between the human and Andromedan factions, threatening to boil over at any moment. Brian and Zara exchanged worried glances, acutely aware of the fragile peace they were struggling to maintain. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Brian's heart raced as he saw Zara's markings pulse with alarm. "Intruders detected in the research lab," a computerized voice announced, echoing through the corridors. Without hesitation, Brian and Zara sprinted towards the lab, their footsteps echoing in the metallic hallways. As they approached, they heard the sound of a struggle within. "It's the strike team," Zara whispered, her markings dimming with concern. "Counselor Vex must have sent them." Brian's mind raced, searching for a solution. Then, an idea struck him. "Zara, our connection, the bioluminescence. We can use it." Zara's eyes widened in understanding. She quickly grabbed a nearby medical scanner, her fingers flying over its controls. "If I can modify this to amplify our reaction, we might have a chance." As Zara worked, Brian heard the sound of the lab door beginning to buckle under the assault. Time was running out. "Done," Zara announced just as the door burst open. Brian pulled Zara close, their bodies pressing together. He felt the familiar tingle of their connection intensify, building to a crescendo. As the strike team poured into the lab, Brian and Zara triggered their shared bioluminescence. A blinding flash erupted from their joined forms, filling the room with searing light. The Andromedan soldiers stumbled back, their vision overwhelmed by the unexpected brilliance. "Now!" Brian shouted, grabbing Zara's hand and a nearby data drive containing their research. They dashed past the disoriented strike team, their hearts pounding in unison as they fled the lab. Behind them, they could hear the confused shouts of the Andromedan soldiers as they struggled to regain their bearings. As Brian and Zara raced through the corridors, they became aware of a growing commotion. The sound of angry voices and scuffling feet grew louder as they approached the main atrium. They burst into the large open space to find chaos unfolding before them. Human and Andromedan workers were locked in a heated confrontation, tensions finally boiling over into open conflict. In the center of the melee, Brian spotted Commander Harper and Dr. Alara, the Andromedan geneticists, desperately trying to restore order. Harper's authoritative voice rang out above the din, while Alara's markings pulsed with calming patterns. "Everyone, stand down," Harper bellowed, his voice cutting through the noise. "This infighting solves nothing." Dr. Alara added her own plea, releasing a cloud of pheromones designed to soothe Andromedan emotions. "Please, let us discuss this rationally. We are all in this together." The combined efforts of Harper and Alara began to take effect. The rioters slowly disengaged, the fury in their eyes giving way to confusion and exhaustion. As the situation in the atrium de-escalated, Brian and Zara found themselves face-to-face with Lieutenant Cook and a group of human workers. Cook's eyes narrowed as he took in their disheveled appearance, and the data drive clutched in Brian's hand. "Kennedy," Cook growled, "what's going on? Why are you running around with that alien?" Before Brian could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. The Andromedan strike team had regained their senses and were in pursuit. Cook's expression shifted as he witnessed Brian and Zara working in tandem to evade their pursuers. The seamless coordination between human and Andromedan gave him pause, challenging his preconceptions. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the base. The storm outside had intensified, its fury finally breaching the facility's defenses. A loud crack reverberated through the atrium as a fissure appeared in the outer wall, letting in a blast of frigid air. Temperatures plummeted rapidly as the icy wind howled through the breach. Humans and Andromedans alike shivered, their breath visible in the rapidly cooling air. "We need to seal that breach now," Harper shouted, his teeth chattering. "If we don't, we'll all freeze to death." Brian, his mind racing, recalled his experiences with Zara and the unique way Andromedans shared body heat. An idea formed, bold and unconventional. "Listen to me," he called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "We can survive this, but we need to work together. Humans and Andromedans need to pair up and share body heat. It's our only chance." His proposal was met with skeptical looks and murmurs of discomfort, but as the temperature continued to drop and frost began to form on exposed surfaces, desperation set in. Slowly, hesitantly, humans and Andromedans began to pair off. Brian watched as Commander Harper, after a moment's hesitation, joined Dr. Alara. Even Lieutenant Cook, his face a mask of reluctance, allowed an Andromedan worker to embrace him. As the unlikely pairs huddled together, sharing warmth, Brian turned to Zara. Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They moved closer, their bodies fitting together perfectly, a beacon of hope in the midst of the crisis. The Andromedan strike team, faced with the same dire circumstances, set aside their mission. Brian watched in amazement as they joined the efforts to repair the breach, working alongside the very people they had been sent to capture. As the repair work progressed and the shared body heat began to take effect, Brian noticed something extraordinary. The injuries sustained during the earlier riot were healing at an accelerated rate for both humans and Andromedans. Dr. Alara, ever the scientist, was already taking notes on her datapad, her eyes wide with excitement at the implications of this discovery. As the immediate danger passed and the breach was sealed, Brian and Zara found a quiet corner away from the others. The intensity of recent events had forged their bond into something deeper, more profound. They embraced, their connection igniting once more. But this time as they parted, Zara gasped. Her markings flashed with surprise as she examined her own body. "Brian," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and a hint of trepidation. "Something's changing. I think your DNA is affecting me." Before Brian could respond, a crackle of static filled the air. Commander Harper had managed to establish communication with Earth, despite the ongoing storm. As Harper began his report detailing the incredible events that had unfolded on Fridia, Brian and Zara exchanged a look. Whatever came next, they knew their journey was just the beginning. The true challenge of bridging the gap between humans and Andromedans was just beginning. The true challenge of bridging the gap between humans and Andromedans was just starting to unfold. As the storm outside gradually subsided, the base buzzed with activity. News of the extraordinary events on Fridia spread rapidly, reaching both Earth and Andromeda. The implications of what had transpired sent shockwaves through both societies. In the days that followed, Brian and Zara found themselves at the center of intense scientific scrutiny. Dr. Alara, her markings pulsing with excitement, approached them as they sat in the base's common area. "I've been analyzing the data from our recent incident," she said, her eyes gleaming. "The physiological changes in Zara are unprecedented. I'd like to propose a series of controlled experiments to study the long-term effects of your interaction." Brian glanced at Zara, who nodded slowly. "We're in," he said. "If it helps foster understanding between our species, it's worth it." As they began the experiments, Earth's governments engaged in heated debates about the potential benefits and risks of further cooperation with the Andromedans. Meanwhile, the Andromedan High Council faced its own internal turmoil over their species' future direction. At the base, tensions remained high as everyone adjusted to the new reality of human-Andromedan cooperation. Lieutenant Cook, his perspective shifted by recent events, found himself in deep conversation with Lyra. "I never thought I'd say this," Cook admitted, "but we need to find ways to integrate our people better. The crisis showed us what we can achieve together." Lyra's markings flickered in agreement. "I believe you're right. Perhaps we could start with some joint training exercises." As they discussed implementation strategies, Commander Harper received an urgent communication from Earth. His face grew grave as he listened, and he quickly summoned Brian and Zara to his office. "We've got a situation," Harper said as they entered. "Counselor Vex's involvement in the strike team's mission has been exposed. There's evidence linking him directly to the attack." Zara's markings dimmed with shock. "This will cause chaos in the High Council." Harper nodded. "It already has. Vex has been arrested, and there's a major shift in power dynamics. Those who support increased cooperation with humans are gaining ground." As political earthquakes shook both human and Andromedan societies, life at the base continued. Dr. Alara's experiments on Brian and Zara progressed, yielding unexpected results. One morning, as Brian underwent another round of tests, Dr. Alara gasped. "This is remarkable," she murmured, staring at her screens. "The genetic interplay between your DNA is producing hybrid cells with extraordinary properties." Brian sat up, intrigued. "What kind of properties?" "Enhanced regenerative capabilities, improved resistance to extreme temperatures," Dr. Alara explained, her markings pulsing rapidly. "This could revolutionize medicine for both our species." As word of the groundbreaking research spread, a joint scientific delegation from Earth and Andromeda was dispatched to Fridia. Among them was Dr. Marcus Cook, Lieutenant Cook's brother and a renowned human geneticist. The base buzzed with anticipation as the delegation arrived. Dr. Marcus Cook, a tall man with piercing blue eyes, stepped off the transport, his gaze immediately locking onto Brian and Zara. "So, you're the couple everyone's talking about," he said, a hint of fascination in his voice. "I'm looking forward to studying your case closely." As the research intensified, Brian began experiencing his own physiological changes. One evening, as he and Zara relaxed in their quarters, he noticed a faint glow emanating from his skin. "Zara, look," he said, holding out his arm. A weak bioluminescent glow pulsed just beneath the surface of his skin. Zara's markings flashed with surprise. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the glow with her fingers. "How do you feel?" Brian flexed his hand, considering. "Different. My body temperature feels more stable, like I could walk outside without a suit and be fine." As Brian grappled with his evolving identity, more human Andromedan pairs at the base reported similar experiences. The wave of interspecies relationships created tension among conservative members of both species, who feared the long-term consequences of genetic mixing. Lieutenant Cook, once skeptical of Andromedans, now found himself advocating for greater cooperation. He and Lyra worked tirelessly to implement new integration policies, their own relationship deepening in the process. As news of the genetic breakthroughs spread beyond Fridia, external pressures mounted. Earth-based pharmaceutical companies and Andromedan medical consortiums began vying for access to the research. Commander Harper paced his office, deep in discussion with the Andromedan leadership. "We need to protect the integrity of this mission," he insisted. "If we allow commercial interests to take over, we risk losing control of a potentially world-changing discovery." Unbeknownst to those at the base, a group of human and Andromedan extremists had formed a covert alliance. Their goal, to sabotage the research and end the cooperation between the two species. Late one night, as the base slept, a shadowy figure slipped into the research lab. With practiced movements, they released a genetically engineered virus into the air filtration system. The next morning, Brian woke feeling unusually weak. Beside him, Zara's markings were dim and erratic. "Something's wrong," she mumbled, her voice strained. As alarms blared and medical teams rushed to their aid, the base went into lockdown. Dr. Alara and Dr. Marcus Cook worked frantically to identify the cause of the mysterious illness. In the medical bay, Brian and Zara lay side by side, their conditions deteriorating rapidly. The fate of human Andromedan relations hung in the balance as the race to find a cure began. As Brian and Zara's conditions deteriorated rapidly, the medical bay transformed into a frenzy of activity. Dr. Alara and Dr. Marcus Cook worked tirelessly, their faces etched with concentration as they pored over test results and genetic analyses. "This virus is unlike anything I've ever seen," Dr. Marcus muttered, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the pathogen structure. It's specifically targeting the hybrid cells. Dr. Ilara's markings pulsed with urgency as she examined another set of data. "Wait," she said, her voice rising with excitement. "Look at this protein sequence. It's unique to the hybrid cells, but it seems to be resisting the virus's effects." Dr. Marcus leaned in, his eyes widening as he processed the information. "You're right. This could be our key to developing a cure." As the two scientists delved deeper into their research, Commander Harper entered the lab, his face grave. "What's our status?" he asked, his eyes darting between the unconscious forms of Brian and Zara. Dr. Ilara turned to him, her markings dimming slightly. "We've identified a potential solution, but we face a significant challenge. The protein we need is only produced by hybrid cells, and we don't have nearly enough to synthesize an effective cure." Harper's brow furrowed. "What are our options?" Dr. Ilara hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I have a proposal, but it's risky. We could use Brian and Zara's hybrid cells as a template to create a temporary genetic modification procedure for volunteers. This would allow them to produce the needed protein." "And the risks?" Harper asked, his voice tense. "Unknown," Dr. Marcus interjected. "We'd be pushing the boundaries of interspecies genetic manipulation. The procedure would require intimate physical contact between human and Andromedan pairs to facilitate the transfer." Harper paced the room, weighing the implications. After a long moment, he nodded. "Do it. I'll call for volunteers." Within hours, the base was abuzz with activity. Despite the risks, several human Andromedan pairs stepped forward, their faces a mix of willpower and apprehension. Among them were Lieutenant Cook and Lyra, whose growing connection had become evident to all. As the volunteers prepared for the procedure, a series of unexplained power outages swept through the base. Security footage flickered, revealing glimpses of shadowy figures moving through darkened corridors. In the medical bay, Brian stirred, his consciousness fighting through the haze of illness. He blinked, his vision focusing on the dim glow emanating from his skin. With a jolt of realization, he understood that his newly developed bioluminescence could be an asset. Summoning his strength, Brian pushed himself up. "Commander," he called out weakly, "I can help. My glow. I can see in the dark." Harper turned, surprise etched on his face. "Brian, you're in no condition." "Please," Brian interrupted, his voice stronger. "I can track them. Let me help." After a moment's hesitation, Harper nodded. "All right, but you stay with the security team. No heroics." As Brian joined the efforts to secure the base, Dr. Ilara noticed the alarming change in Zara's vitals. Her hybrid cells were breaking down at an accelerated rate, threatening complete organ failure. "We need to stabilize her immediately," Dr. Ilara announced, her markings flashing with urgency. "Her system requires a massive influx of human DNA." Without hesitation, Brian stepped forward. "Use me," he said, his voice unwavering. "Whatever it takes." Dr. Marcus explained the risks of the full-body transfusion procedure, but Brian's grit remained unshaken. As they prepared for the life-saving procedure, alarms blared throughout the base. Lieutenant Cook's voice crackled over the comm system. "The extremists are making a move on the main power core. We need backup." As Brian and Zara underwent the transfusion, Cook and Lyra led a team to defend the core. Their bodies, still adapting to the genetic modification, moved with uncanny synchronization. They anticipated each other's actions, their combined efforts proving formidable against the attackers. In the research lab, Dr. Marcus made a chilling discovery. "This virus," he whispered, his face pale, "it contains traces of my own research that was stolen years ago." The revelation shook him to his core, but it also fueled his tenacity. He redoubled his efforts, pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion as he worked to refine the cure. As the battle raged on, the genetic modification volunteers began producing the needed protein in significant quantities. Dr. Ilara and her team worked frantically to synthesize the cure, acutely aware that every second counted for Brian and Zara's survival. Suddenly, the doors to the medical bay burst open. Dr. Voros, a disgraced Andromedan scientist, stormed in, brandishing a device that pulsed with ominous energy. "You'll undo everything," he snarled, aiming the device at Brian and Zara's unconscious forms. In that moment, Brian's eyes snapped open. With a surge of desperate energy, he summoned an intense burst of bioluminescence. The blinding flash caught Dr. Voros off guard, giving security forces the opening they needed to subdue him. As the last of the extremists were neutralized, Dr. Alara administered the synthesized cure to Brian and Zara. The entire base held its breath, waiting to see if the treatment would work. Hours passed in tense silence. Finally, Dr. Alara emerged from the medical bay, a look of cautious optimism on her face. "They're stabilizing," she announced, her markings pulsing with relief. "The cure is working." As Brian and Zara began their slow recovery, the full impact of recent events became apparent. The genetic modifications undergone by the volunteers had led to permanent changes in their physiology, creating a new subset of human Andromedan hybrids. In their hospital beds, Brian and Zara's hands found each other, their fingers intertwining. Their shared ordeal had forged their bond into something unbreakable, a testament to the potential of human Andromedan unity. As news of the events on Fridia spread throughout Earth and Andromeda, questions arose about the future of both species. The unprecedented genetic integration had opened doors to new possibilities, but it had also raised complex issues of identity and society. Brian gazed at Zara, his newly stabilized hybrid cells allowing him to see her in a way he never had before. The challenges ahead were immense, but as he looked into her eyes, he knew that together, they could face anything the universe might throw their way. At them, the future was uncertain, but they faced it together. As the days passed, Brian and Zara's recovery progressed steadily. The medical bay buzzed with activity as Dr. Alara and Dr. Marcus Cook monitored their vital signs and analyzed the effectiveness of the hybrid cell cure. The success of their treatment sparked a flurry of excitement among the medical staff, who saw the potential for groundbreaking advancements in interspecies medicine. One morning, as Brian sat up in his bed, flexing his fingers and marveling at the faint bioluminescent glow beneath his skin, Commander Harper entered the room. His face was a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Good to see you both on the mend," Harper said, nodding to Brian and Zara. "How are you feeling?" "Better every day," Brian replied, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Though I'm not sure I'll ever get used to this glow." Zara's markings pulsed with amusement. "I think it suits you," she said, reaching out to touch his hand. Harper cleared his throat. "I'm glad to hear it because we're going to need you both. The events of the past few weeks have accelerated our timeline for integration. We're expanding the base to accommodate new researchers and diplomats from both Earth and Andromeda." Brian's eyebrows rose. "Expanding? How?" "We're constructing a dedicated medical research facility," Harper explained. "It'll be equipped with technology from both our species. Dr. Alara and Dr. Marcus will be leading a joint research team to explore the full potential of human Andromedan genetic compatibility." Zara sat up straighter, her markings pulsing with interest. "That's incredible news, Commander. But won't such a rapid expansion strain our resources?" Harper nodded, his expression growing serious. "You're right, Zara. Our power generation capabilities are already being pushed to their limits. That's why we're initiating a new project, Operation Deep Core." He activated a holographic display showing a schematic of a massive drill. "We're going to tap into Frigidia's geothermal energy. This drill will penetrate the planet's icy crust to reach the molten core. It's a daring plan, but it's our best shot at meeting our growing energy needs." Brian stared at the hologram, his mind racing with the implications. "That's ambitious. Who's going to oversee this?" "We've brought in a specialist," Harper replied. "Dr. Astra Nova, an Andromedan physicist. She's brilliant, but controversial. Her theories on energy manipulation are unorthodox, but they might be exactly what we need to make this work." As if on cue, the door to the medical bay slid open, revealing a tall, slender Andromedan with iridescent markings that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Dr. Nova's eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail with lightning speed. "Ah, so these are our hybrid heroes," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent Brian couldn't quite place. "Fascinating. I look forward to studying your unique physiology." Brian felt a mix of curiosity and unease under her intense gaze. "Dr. Nova, it's a pleasure to meet you. I understand you'll be leading Operation Deep Core?" Co-leading, Dr. Nova corrected, her markings flashing with what might have been irritation. I'll be working closely with your engineering teams. In fact, Commander Harper has informed me that you, Brian, will be acting as a liaison between the human and Andromedan engineers. Brian blinked in surprise. Me? But I'm not an engineer. Harper stepped forward. Your unique perspective as a human with Andromedan traits makes you ideal for this role, Brian. You'll be able to bridge communication gaps and help solve problems that might arise from our different approaches. As Brian processed this information, Zara spoke up. Commander, what about the potential environmental impact of this drilling operation? Frigidia's ecosystem is delicate and largely unexplored. Harper nodded. We've considered that, Zara. In fact, I'd like you to lead a team to study the planet's ecosystem more closely. Your expertise in xenobiology will be crucial in ensuring we proceed responsibly. Dr. Nova's markings pulsed with impatience. Yes, very important. But we must move quickly. The energy demands of the expanding base won't wait for lengthy environmental surveys. Zara's own markings flashed with a mix of concern and willpower. We'll work efficiently, Dr. Nova, but we won't compromise the integrity of Frigidia's ecosystem. As the tension in the room grew, Brian found himself looking between Zara and Dr. Nova, sensing the clash of priorities that lay ahead. The expansion of the base and the initiation of Operation Deep Core promised to usher in a new era of human-Andromedan cooperation, but it was clear that challenges lay ahead. When do we start? Brian asked him, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. As soon as you're cleared by medical, Harper replied. We've already begun preliminary work on the expansion. The new research facility is taking shape, and the engineering team is finalizing the designs for the deep core drill. Dr. Nova's markings pulsed with excitement. I have some modifications to propose for the drill's energy conversion systems. With the right adjustments, we could increase efficiency by at least 27%. As the group discussed the details of the upcoming projects, Brian caught Zara's eye. They shared a look of understanding, both aware that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential breakthroughs and unforeseen obstacles. Outside the medical bay's windows, Frigidia's icy landscape stretched to the horizon, a blank canvas awaiting the mark of human and Andromedan ambition. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the frozen plains, Brian couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden beneath the ice, waiting to be discovered. Uncovered. As these thoughts swirled in his mind, Brian turned his attention back to the task at hand. We should begin preparations for the initial survey, he said, addressing Dr. Nova and Zara. The sooner we can assess the mineral deposits, the faster we can start Operation Deep Core. Dr. Nova's markings pulsed with enthusiasm. Agreed. I've already calibrated our equipment to detect the specific energy signatures we're looking for. We'll need to descend into the subglacial caves to get accurate readings. Zara frowned, her own markings flickering with concern. We need to proceed carefully. These caves could be home to undiscovered life forms. We can't risk damaging the ecosystem. Time is of the essence, Dr. Nova countered, her voice taking on an edge of impatience. The base's energy needs won't wait for lengthy surveys. Brian held up his hands, sensing the tension between the two. We'll find a balance. Let's gear up and head out. We can assess the situation once we're down there. As they prepared for the descent, donning thermal suits and checking their equipment, an alert sounded throughout the base. Brian's newly enhanced hearing picked up the high-pitched whine of defense systems activating. What's going on? He asked, looking towards the ceiling, as if he could see through it to the surface. Before anyone could respond, Commander Harper's voice came over the intercom. Attention all personnel. An unidentified ship has entered orbit. We are initiating a base-wide lockdown as a precautionary measure. All non-essential personnel, please report to your designated safe zones. Extraction team, proceed with your mission, but maintain constant communication. Brian exchanged worried glances with Zara and Dr. Nova. The commander's voice had been calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension that Brian's heightened senses picked up on. Should we postpone the extraction? Zara asked, her markings pulsing with concern. Dr. Nova shook her head emphatically. No, we proceed as planned. The base needs this energy source now more than ever, especially if we're facing a potential threat. Brian nodded, making a decision. Dr. Nova's right. We continue, but we stay alert. Let's move out. The trio made their way to the entrance of the subglacial cave system, a yawning maw in the icy landscape. As they began their descent, Brian couldn't shake the feeling that they were entering another world entirely. The ice walls around them seemed to glow with an inner light, refracting the beams from their headlamps in mesmerizing patterns. The further they descended, the more Brian's newly enhanced senses came alive. He could hear the subtle creaks and groans of the ice, feel the minute vibrations through his feet. After what seemed like hours of careful descent, they reached a vast cavern. Dr. Nova's equipment began to beep insistently. This is it, she announced, her markings pulsing with excitement. The mineral deposits are just ahead. As they moved forward, setting up their experimental extraction equipment, Brian noticed something odd. The ice beneath their feet was vibrating, almost imperceptibly at first, but growing stronger with each passing moment. Do you feel that? He asked, looking at Zara and Dr. Nova. Zara nodded, her expression concerned. The cave system must be less stable than we thought. We need to work quickly. Dr. Nova was already calibrating the extraction device, her fingers flying over the controls. I'm initiating the process now. Brian, I need you to monitor the energy output. Zara, keep an eye on our surroundings. As the extraction began, the vibrations intensified. Brian watched in awe as the hybrid technology came to life. Andromedan energy manipulation techniques working in concert with human mining equipment. The mineral deposit began to glow, pulsing with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, a violent tremor shook the cavern. Ice crystals rained down from above, and Brian heard the ominous sound of cracking ice. The cave system is destabilizing, Zara shouted, her markings flashing in alarm. Dr. Nova's face was a mask of concentration. We can't stop now. We're so close. Brian tried to contact the surface, but all he got was static. Communications are down, he reported, a sinking feeling in his stomach. As the extraction continued, the cavern around them groaned and shifted. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ice walls, and the ground beneath their feet began to buckle. We need to abort, Brian yelled over the increasing noise. Dr. Nova shook her head vehemently. No, I can stabilize it. I just need more power. Without warning, she began manipulating the energy fields around them in ways Brian had never seen before. The air crackled with electricity, and Brian felt his hybrid cells responding to the surge of power. Brian, I need your help, Dr. Nova called out. Your hybrid physiology can help channel this energy. We can create a force field to protect us and the equipment. Without hesitation, Brian stepped forward, placing his hands on the extraction device. He felt a jolt of energy course through him, his bioluminescence flaring brightly in response. Zara watched in amazement as Brian and Dr. Nova worked in tandem, their combined efforts creating a shimmering barrier around them. The cave continued to collapse around them, but the force field held. As the extraction process reached its climax, Brian felt something changing within the mineral deposit. The energy signature was shifting, becoming something entirely new. It's working, Dr. Nova exclaimed, her markings pulsing with triumph. We're not just extracting the mineral, we're transforming it. As the process completed, the tremors began to subside. The force field flickered and died, leaving them surrounded by the aftermath of the cave-in. But there, in the center of their equipment, glowed a sample of something that had never existed before. A hybrid mineral that pulsed with the combined essence of human and Andromedan technology. Exhausted but exhilarated, Brian, Zara, and Dr. Nova secured the sample and began to gather their equipment. As they prepared for the ascent back to the surface, none of them could have imagined the scene that awaited them above, or the pivotal role their discovery would play in the future of human-Andromedan relations. With the hybrid minerals safely stored and their gear packed, the trio began the arduous climb back to the surface. Brian's enhanced strength came in handy as they navigated the treacherous, partially collapsed tunnels. As they ascended, the static in their communication devices began to clear, replaced by fragmented transmissions that hinted at the chaos unfolding above. Above, Brian's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of urgent conversations and hurried footsteps. As they finally emerged from the cave entrance, squinting against the harsh, Frigidian sunlight, Brian, Zara, and Dr. Nova were met with a scene of controlled chaos. The base was alive with activity, and unfamiliar Andromedan ships hovered nearby, their sleek designs a stark contrast to the utilitarian human vessels. Commander Harper strode towards them, his face a mask of awe-inspiring tension. "Welcome back," he said, his eyes darting to the secure container holding their precious cargo. "We have a situation." Brian opened his mouth to speak, but Harper held up a hand. "I know you have questions, but time is short. The Andromedan elders arrived while you were underground. Counselor Zex is here, along with several others. They're demanding an immediate conference about your findings." Zara's markings pulsed with surprise. "The elders? Here?" "That's right," Harper confirmed. "And they're not the only ones interested in what you've discovered. We've detected a fleet of ships entering the system. Ships that don't match any known Andromedan or human designs." Dr. Nova clutched the container holding the hybrid mineral sample. "We need to secure this immediately. The implications of what we've created are staggering." Harper nodded. "Agreed. But first, we need you three in the conference room. The elders won't wait." As they hurried across the base, Brian's mind raced. The adrenaline from their near-death experience in the caves was still coursing through his veins, and now they were being thrust into what could be a pivotal moment in human-Andromedan relations. The conference room was filled with tension so thick Brian could almost taste it. Counselor Zex stood at the head of the table, his imposing figure radiating authority. Other Andromedan elders flanked him, their markings pulsing with a variety of emotions Brian couldn't quite decipher. As they entered, all eyes turned to them. Brian felt the weight of their stares, a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and barely concealed excitement. Dr. Nova stepped forward, placing the container on the table. "Counselors, Commander," she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "What we've discovered goes beyond our wildest expectations." She activated a holographic display showing the molecular structure of the hybrid mineral. "This isn't just a new energy source. It's a fusion of human and Andromedan technology at the most fundamental level." As Dr. Nova explained the properties of the mineral, Brian watched the reactions around the room. The human scientists looked awestruck, while the Andromedan elders' markings pulsed with a mix of amazement and concern. Counselor Zex leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the holographic display. "This discovery, it changes everything," he said, his voice low, "but it also confirms the fears of some among our people." The room fell silent. Zex continued, "There is a faction within Andromedan society, the Purists. They believe that our continued interaction with humans will lead to the dilution of our culture, our very biology. This," he gestured to the hybrid mineral, "will be seen as proof of their concerns." Before anyone could respond, alarms blared throughout the base. Latimer Cook burst into the room, his face grim. "Commander, we've got incoming. A fleet of ships just dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. They're not responding to hails, and their energy signatures don't match any known configurations." Harper's teeth gritted. "The Purists?" Counselor Zex nodded solemnly. "It appears they've learned of our mission here. They aim to stop this collaboration by any means necessary." Commander Harper sprang into action. "Initiate evacuation protocols for all non-essential personnel. Lieutenant Cook, prepare our defenses. Dr. Nova, secure that mineral sample. Brian, Zara, I need you two to assist her. Your hybrid physiology makes you uniquely suited to handle this material." As the room erupted into activity, Brian caught Zara's eye. They shared a look of tenacity, both understanding the gravity of the situation. Dr. Nova quickly secured the mineral sample in a portable containment unit. "We need to get this to the high-security lab," she said. "If the Purists are coming, we can't risk this falling into the wrong hands." As they rushed through the corridors of the base, Brian's enhanced senses picked up the sounds of the base preparing for battle. The whine of defense systems powering up, the clatter of weapons being distributed, the hurried footsteps of personnel moving to their stations. They reached the lab just as another alarm sounded. Brian's comm link crackled to life with Lieutenant Cook's voice. First wave of Purist ships entering the atmosphere. All personnel, brace for potential impact. Dr. Nova worked feverishly to set up an experimental energy converter, her fingers flying over the controls. We need to harness the power of this mineral, she explained. If we can create an energy shield around Fridia, we might be able to repel the Purist attack. Brian and Zara took their positions on either side of the converter, ready to act as conduits for the mineral's energy. As Dr. Nova activated the device, Brian felt a surge of power unlike anything he'd experienced before. His body began to glow, bioluminescence spreading across his skin in intricate patterns. Beside him, Zara gasped, her own body lighting up in response to the energy flow. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Brian felt a connection that went beyond the physical, beyond the merging of human and Andromedan. The lab shook with the force of distant explosions. Through the window, Brian could see flashes of light in the sky, the base's defenses engaging the Purist ships. The energy shield began to form, a shimmering dome spreading outward from their location. As the power surged through them, Brian felt his body changing, adapting to the immense energy. He could sense Zara going through the same transformation beside him. Their hybrid physiologies were evolving, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Dr. Nova watched in fascination, her scientific mind racing to understand what she was witnessing. Incredible, she murmured. Your bodies are assimilating the energy, using it to enhance your hybrid traits. The shield continued to grow, but so did the strain on Brian and Zara. Sweat beaded on their brows as they struggled to contain and direct the massive energy flow. Through gritted teeth, Brian managed to ask, "How much longer?" Before Dr. Nova could answer, a violent tremor shook the lab. Alarms blared as Lieutenant Cook's voice came over the comlink. "Purist ground forces have breached the perimeter. All security teams, engage." The energy converter began to spark, overloading from the immense power it was channeling. Dr. Nova frantically worked to stabilize it, but it was clear that the system was on the verge of collapse. In that moment of crisis, Brian reached out and grasped Zara's hand. Their eyes met, and without a word, they understood what needed to be done. As one, they embraced, their glowing bodies intertwining. The effect was immediate and stunning. The erratic energy flow stabilized, their hybrid physiologies working in perfect harmony. The shield snapped into place around Fridia with a burst of light so bright it momentarily blinded everyone on the planet's surface. As the light faded, Brian and Zara slowly separated, their bodies still glowing with residual energy. They turned to see Dr. Nova staring at them in awe, her markings pulsing with excitement and curiosity. Before any of them could speak, Commander Harper's voice came over the comlink, thick with relief and amazement. "The shield is holding. The Purist ships are retreating. Whatever you did down there, it worked." Brian, Zara, and Dr. Nova shared a look of exhausted triumph. They had succeeded, but as the adrenaline began to fade, Brian realized that this was only the beginning. The hybrid mineral, their evolving physiologies, the Purist threat, all of it pointed to a future filled with both incredible potential and daunting challenges. As they prepared to leave the lab and face the aftermath of the battle, Brian couldn't help but wonder. What would this new chapter in human-Andromedan relations bring? And how would he and Zara, caught between two worlds and now changed in ways they were only beginning to understand, fit into this rapidly evolving future? Landscape. The implications of their discovery and the battle they had just endured were only beginning to unfold. As Brian and Zara emerged from the lab, still glowing faintly from the residual energy, they were met with a flurry of activity. The base had transformed into a hive of controlled chaos, with personnel rushing to assess damage, tend to the injured, and secure the perimeter against any potential follow-up attacks. Commander Harper approached them, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and concern. "You two, what happened in there? The energy readings we detected were off the charts." Before they could respond, Dr. Nova interjected, her voice brimming with excitement. "Commander, we need to get them to the medical bay immediately. The changes they've undergone, it's unprecedented." Harper nodded, quickly shifting into action mode. "Agreed. Dr. Alara and Dr. Marcus Cook are already preparing for a full examination. Let's move. As they made their way through the corridors, Brian couldn't help but notice the stares they were receiving. His skin still shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and he could feel a newfound strength coursing through his veins. Beside him, Zara's markings pulsed with a vibrancy he had never seen before. The medical bay was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Dr. Alara, the chief medical officer, and Dr. Marcus Cook, the resident expert on human Andromedan physiology, were ready with an array of advanced diagnostic equipment. "On the beds, please," Dr. Alara instructed, her tone professional but unable to hide a hint of fascination. As Brian and Zara lay down, holographic displays sprang to life above them, showing real-time data of their internal systems. Dr. Marcus Cook let out a low whistle as he studied the readings. "This is remarkable," he muttered, his fingers flying over the control panel. "Their cellular structure has achieved a level of integration I never thought possible. It's as if their bodies have found the perfect balance between human and Andromedan physiology." Dr. Alara nodded, her eyes fixed on the displays. "Look at these regenerative capabilities. They're off the charts. And their environmental adaptability. It's like their bodies can now thrive in almost any condition." As the examination continued, Brian felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He caught Zara's eye, and they shared a look of understanding. Whatever they had become, they were in this together. Meanwhile, in another part of the base, Dr. Nova was presenting her findings on the hybrid mineral to a rapt audience of human and Andromedan scientists. The holographic display showed the complex molecular structure of the mineral, now officially dubbed Frigidium. "The energy potential of Frigidium is unlike anything we've ever encountered," Dr. Nova explained, her markings pulsing with enthusiasm. "Its unique properties allow for unprecedented energy, conversion, and storage. But that's just the beginning." She manipulated the display, showing a simulation of a sleek spacecraft. "With Frigidium as a power source, we could revolutionize space travel. Faster-than-light propulsion systems, once thought to be centuries away, are now within our grasp." The room erupted into excited chatter, with scientists from both species already beginning to collaborate on potential applications. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Nova found herself approached by Counselor Zex. "Your work here is truly groundbreaking, Doctor," the Andromedan elder said, his tone grave but tinged with respect. "The purists may have failed in their attack, but the repercussions of this discovery will be felt across both our civilizations." Dr. Nova nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Which is why we need to ensure that this technology is developed responsibly, with both human and Andromedan interests in mind." Zex's markings pulsed in agreement. "Indeed, I believe it's time we took the next step in our collaboration. I will be extending an invitation for a human delegation to visit Andromeda. It's time our people saw firsthand the benefits of our partnership." As word of this historic invitation spread through the base, Brian and Zara were finally released from the medical bay. Their examination had revealed no immediate health concerns, but they were under orders to report any unusual symptoms or changes. They found themselves in the observation deck, looking out over the icy expanse of Frigidia. The planet that had once seemed so hostile now felt like the birthplace of a new era. "It's all happening so fast," Brian murmured, his hand finding Zara's. "Just a few days ago, I was a standard human explorer. Now?" Zara squeezed his hand, her markings pulsing softly. "Now we're something new, something that could change everything for both our peoples." As they stood there, contemplating their role in the unfolding events, they noticed a flurry of activity on the landing pad below. A sleek, unfamiliar spacecraft was touching down, its design a clear fusion of human and Andromedan technology. "That must be the new Frigidium-powered prototype," Brian realized, his enhanced vision allowing him to pick out details that would have been impossible before. Zara nodded, her own senses equally sharpened. "It looks like they're preparing for a test flight. Perhaps?" Before she could finish her thought, their comlinks chirped simultaneously. Commander Harper's voice came through, clear and urgent. "Brian, Zara, report to the command center immediately. We have a mission for you." They shared a look of excitement and apprehension. Whatever this mission was, They knew it would be unlike anything they had experienced before. As they hurried to respond to the summons, the prototype ship below began to power up, its Frigidium core glowing with potential. The future they had inadvertently set in motion was about to take its next leap forward, and Brian and Zara found themselves at the very heart of it all.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.